Here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Non-Victim Nation podcast. And today I am joined by Heston Silbert, who was a retired colonel for the Department of Public Safety and also received the 2022 Chief of the Year award from Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police. Unfortunately, I couldn't memorize that, so I had to look. But
No problem.
um, I thought that was really cool. But the funniest thing is that like I met you so quite a while ago, and to me, I wasn't aware of any of that. You were just a really cool guy that I used to roll in jiu-jitsu with,
Right, right,
so, but I did know that you were involved with DPS. I knew that you were pretty high on the food chain. I just didn't realize how high.
right.
So welcome, and I'm
Yeah,
glad
no,
you could be here.
thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Um, it's one of those things that like I didn't realize that colonel was an attainable rank that you could get to.
Yeah,
So,
the
um,
DPS is, as a lot of state police agencies, is more of a paramilitary organization
mhm,
than a lot of law enforcement agencies.
right. And you've had over 30 years of service?
34 years.
34 years. Wow.
Yeah.
So is that like as a kid, that's just what you wanted to be when you grew up, or how did you get started in that?
No, so I kind of had an interesting upbringing, both Baltimore, grew up in Baltimore,
Mhm.
inner city Baltimore, and then my dad took a job in California with the government and moved to Fresno. And I like to tell people my dad wanted to make sure that I grew up in two cities with the highest crime rates per capita in the United States.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
and but I'm proud to be from both cities. I really am.
Mhm.
Baltimore's a tough city. Um, I had tough relatives. Um, and Fresno's a tough city too, and produces some tough dudes. And
Right.
um, so I was glad I got to grow up around that and be indoctrinated to a lot of that,
Mhm.
um, and, and what it represented. And um, but like a lot of families, my family split and whatnot. And I bounced around a lot and lived in many different places, with actually not always with my family.
Mhm.
So uh, my last 2 years of high school, I was able to settle into one place back in Fresno, um, uh, and my senior year of high school, I was discovered as by different universities to play football,
Mhm.
and I went to college to play football, and I was playing college football, and I'd had an episode with it in high school, but nothing like this. And then I had a real serious neck injury, had to have neck surgery, and that led to eventual another neck surgery and ended my football career. So
Mm.
I wanted to first, I didn't want to be in college if I couldn't play football, even though the university I give all the credit in the world to. They honored my scholarship, did
Mhm.
everything they could to keep me in school,
Mhm.
to encourage me to stay in school and get my degree. But I didn't want to be anywhere near college if I wasn't playing football. And wasn't, it was more that I just couldn't watch people play football.
Right.
Uh, then I couldn't watch it on TV.
Mhm.
I was too bothered by it. And then I moved moved back to Los Angeles and was working a bunch of jobs. Tried to go into the Marine Corps. But they thought I had nerve damage.
From the neck
Um,
injury.
yeah,
Okay.
my scar used to stick out further, so they were kind of concerned about that. And so I tried two more times with the Marine Corps, and
Mhm.
that didn't work. And then LAPD was hiring, and there was a test every Tuesday night
Mhm.
at the Venice station, I think it was. Um, Maybe it was on Venice Boulevard, the station that was there. And every Tuesday night they test. And
Right.
so I took the test, and they told everybody, a group of people, to leave the room, and then kept a group of us in the room. So I figured, oh, I'm one of the people who failed the test, and so they're going to tell us how to get better next time. But I was actually in the group that passed the test,
Right.
and that really started me down the road. And so I would have probably gone to LAPD, but they too, during my physical, had concerns about the neck surgery and thought I had nerve damage. I didn't. I don't believe. And what happened is I came to Arizona and tested for Phoenix PD,
Hmm.
and this is where the university had let me have surgery. It was at Barrows Neurological Institute.
Hmm.
So I went to the doctor who did the surgery on me, got my note for LAPD,
Hmm.
and when you tested as an out-of-stater to be a police officer, they did the whole process in a week after once you passed the written.
Right.
So when I was here for that week, I had that note in my hand when I walked into the doctor. It was for the doctor at LAPD addressed to
Right.
him, but I just said, "Sir, would this be okay if I give this to you?" And he looked at it and said, "Good enough for your neurosurgeon, good enough for me."
There you go.
And he let me go. And it's kind of interesting. That same doctor, he doesn't remember this, and uh, his name's Doctor Waddell. I'm sure he's retired. I have no idea what happened to him, but I really owe that guy because twice he impacted my career
Hmm.
for the better. Sometimes these people come into your life for a brief minute
Hmm.
and impact your career. And
Yeah.
so, he didn't sweat me on that. And boom, the next thing I know, Phoenix PD calls him in the academy. Well, LAPD and LA County call me. I'm like 10th week in the academy, 12th. Well, my aunt thought that LA County was calling me because they were looking for me for a crime or something. So she wouldn't tell them where I was,
Right.
but because she was at my mom's house at the time. But they were calling me to offer me a job,
Right.
and uh, but I was already in my 10th week in the academy with Phoenix, so I went through. But that doctor, my 12th week in the academy, I broke my ankle,
Okay.
and I didn't know it, but it was real bad. And then the captain at the academy, my sergeant was trying to take care of me and keep it quiet because he knew we were almost ready to graduate,
Hmm.
4 weeks later. And the captain at the academy had seen me in the shower and saw how bad my leg looked, and he's like, "Hey, you go to the doctor." So they sent me to the doctor, and same good doctor,
Yeah.
Dr. Waddell, and he said, "Hey, I can't let you go back." I said, "Sir, look, I only have this many run days left. Please." I said, "I know how to tape my own ankle. I can do this. I promise you, I'll wear high tops. I'll do this, that, the other." So I taped my ankle up, wore high tops. I took my last physical fitness test wearing pony high tops, you know what I mean, running my mile and a
Right.
half. And but I was getting through that academy, and he, again, that guy, and that's two times really,
Hmm.
because this guy, trusted his patient
Right.
basically to know what was best for him, and
Hmm.
he gave me the opportunity. And I have, like I said, I have no idea whatever happened to him, but if you're out there, hey, thank you.
There you go. Wow.
So
It's probably significantly different now where everybody is so worried about covering their own ass that they probably wouldn't have even given that option.
yeah, times were different,
Hmm.
and the, honestly, I would guess for the generations that have gone before us, they'd say the same
Hmm.
when you see these evolutions of things that transpire. And
Right.
then every now and then, I think we have things that throw us back to our foundations, things like 9/11. Like,
Hmm.
I think sometimes we lose our way,
Right.
both personally. I think we lose our way as a citizenry at times, and then it takes something catastrophic to reset us. Sometimes for better and for worse, right?
Right.
But I mean, in 9/11, I remember you couldn't buy an American flag because they were sold out,
Right.
And
Hmm.
now I'm turning on TV and people are saying death to America and death to Israel, and I'm going,
Yeah.
what the hell is going on?
How did we get to this point?
How did we get here? What's wrong with our society? It's like we've forgotten 23 years ago
Hmm.
what happened. But if you go back generation after generation,
Hmm.
we so easily forget the things that have impacted society and made us form. And I
Hmm.
would like to think become a better society as we've gone forward.
Hmm.
We'll always have societal problems, but I think there's things that have helped us form to be better.
Right.
We're never going to be a perfect nation. We certainly haven't been a perfect nation, but we're certainly the best thing going,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So
So when you look back kind of at like the totality of the career that you had with DPS, I imagine that it's like a lot of other things, like how things were where you started to the time you ended, and like how would you kind of describe that? Like,
Well, when I became a police officer in the late 80s, the crack cocaine epidemic was rampant throughout the United States, and violent crime was starting to escalate to an
right.
all-time high. It's why you saw all the state and federal sentencing mandates and anti-crime bills uh, that took place during that period of time,
Hmm.
truth in sentencing, things such as that. And so I had a lot of gang knowledge coming in, so I was pulled pretty early in my career to start working street gangs at the precinct level,
Right.
and then eventually I worked street gangs at the department level, organized crime. I worked out of the South Mountain precinct, and really it was primarily two precincts in Phoenix that had the largest gang problems: South Mountain precinct and Maryville precinct. And then Central City did as well, but not to the degree that South Mountain and Maryville did.
Right.
So I was assigned to South Mountain Precinct. That's where I spent any time I was in patrol for the most part. I was always back at South Mountain Precinct. So
Hmm.
um, because of that, the murder rate was was going off the charts in the early 90s, and so that's when I came on. I came on at a real violent time
Hmm.
in law enforcement, and street gang violence was off the charts. The Crips and the Bloods had infiltrated every major city coming out of Los Angeles, again with the foundation uh, based on the advent of crack form cocaine,
Hmm.
and it spread, and it really decimated uh, many people in the African American community. I mean, it harmed people of every ethnicity, but it really impacted the African American community, and I saw it firsthand because that's where I worked.
Hmm.
So I believed in the mission, and that mission was to get it off the street and
Right.
protect people in the neighborhoods from it, and from the gang violence. So that's when I began, and worked gangs for a while, and so, when I look at the evolutions and things that have taken place, I could go on and on about all the differences I see
Hmm.
today. In 2015, when I first came to DPS. I remember when we got our first significant fentanyl seizure, and it was powder fentanyl, and it was about 14 pounds taken. One of our troopers uh, in the canine unit, our interdictors, who are to me the absolute best in the country at what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, they're amazing. Um, it took 14 pounds out of a drive line up in northern Arizona. Fortunately, they didn't cut far enough into the drive line for the powder to come out. We didn't realize what we were dealing with
Right.
at the time, but that was really when it kicked. And I have watched the evolution of drugs impact the community. So in the mid 90s to late 90s, you had methamphetamine
Hmm.
really take root. And that's when you started to see the transition from the outlaw bikers used to run methamphetamine to it now being the cartels and the super labs in Mexico taking it over. And when they took it over, it went rampant. So the price, say, for a pound of methamphetamine back in the mid or early 90s might have been $10,000, $11,000 a pound. Well, I think before I left DPS, I want to say that in Arizona anyway, because the price ranges when it distributes throughout the country,
Right.
uh, it was less than $1,000 a pound in some cases,
Wow.
right? Because of mass production.
Yeah.
The cartels did it better than the outlaw bikers did.
Right.
And so you saw that happen in the 90s, and that impacted mostly the white community. I mean, again, I can't say that in totality, but
Hmm.
for the most part, it impacted the white community, right?
Hmm.
Um, And then we'd always had the issue of black tar heroin, coming across. But what I've seen with fentanyl has been completely different. And I testified about this down at the legislature that, fentanyl crosses every socio-economic boundary,
Right.
every ethnic boundary. It is an equal opportunity dose of poison, and it it is laced in everything. And so it's just interesting, with the advent of fentanyl and where it's gone. I am perplexed that people find our homelessness issue complex,
Right.
and don't dig into the root cause.
Hmm.
I taught a class at Arizona State on drugs and crime in society, just a semester ago, and I asked my students why they thought the homelessness issue was so severe. And one of my students, just all the students were great kids. I had like this class in the world, but one of my students very innocently just said, "Well, I think housing costs are a big factor as to why we have homelessness." And I said, that's a very idealistic answer, and there may be some truth to that, to
Hmm.
some modicum. But when you have a drug that makes people basically, you no longer have to stick a needle in your arm
Hmm.
and get the same effect. And, a hit of heroin was about $20 a hit. Maybe if you got a point, it was a 10. You're now buying fentanyl in Arizona for as low as $1 a pill, $2 a pill.
Wow.
So, you stand on a corner with a sign that says we'll work, and by the end of the day you have $100, $120, $200. That's enough to keep you high all day and still go get meals at Burger King,
Hmm.
but you're not really worrying too much about where you live because you're high,
Right.
right? An extreme high, you know, obviously to the point that you're on the edge of death in some cases. So, I think when you look at the homelessness issue that has just exploded, and you see at the lackadaisical attitude that lawmakers in some states, uh, Oregon, Washington, California, have taken,
Hmm.
where homelessness is wildly abundant.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that they don't correlate the juxtaposition of those two things
Hmm.
is ridiculous. It's obvious what's going on.
Right.
You know, you've created. You wanted to see what it would be like to have a free drug market, or to see what the legalization of drugs would do.
Hmm.
Here you have it. What do you think is going to happen when you have people walking around stoned all the time? That they're going to go to work every day? If we
Yeah.
legalize drugs, we're going to have a productive society every day?
Hmm.
No, we're not.
Right.
It's going to have an effect. It's going to have an impact. And here you go. Here's the impact. Here's the outcome. Here's the proof. But we sit here and act like it's this social phenomenon that all of a sudden we have a homelessness issue.
Right.
No, we have a huge drug issue,
Hmm.
and that's a we've got to attack the root of the problem. So the problem is that when you ask me what I saw from the beginning
Hmm.
of my career to now, the microcosm where I worked was in a disenfranchised community, and it was affecting many African Americans with crack form cocaine.
Hmm.
And like I said, meth would hit the white communities a bit, but fentanyl's hitting everybody, and that's the difference. So we went from, I can't call the crack epidemic, because it was an epidemic, a micro problem. It was a macro problem,
Hmm.
but it was having a micro effect disproportionately on certain communities.
Right.
Whereas fentanyl is a macro problem that is having a macro effect
Hmm.
on every community in every city, and impacting homelessness and impacting some crime. But the interesting thing is, that I watched happen. Whereas with crack, violent crime went with it because you were battling for territory. You know, you drive
Right.
into certain neighborhoods in Phoenix. I don't want to name them, but you drive into certain neighborhoods in Phoenix, and there'd be 14 Bloods, 15 Crips, and I'm not going to name each specific set, uh, but you drive in there, they'd blatantly be out there slinging dope, and then they're shooting. You know, now you've got the shootings going on, homicide rates going up, and then you you look at where we are with fentanyl, and you've got some law enforcement officials right now patting themselves on the back and rubbing their tummies, talking about, look at how great we're doing on crime suppression. We're doing so well on crime suppression. Well, no, actually, you're not doing well on crime suppression. Fentanyl is doing well on crime suppression.
Hmm.
So you've got this dichotomy taking place
Right.
of the devastation fentanyl causes on human life
Hmm.
and the horrible losses that people have felt losing family members and loved ones.
Hmm.
But what you have to realize is part of the reason your property crimes, your part one, if you're going by UCR crimes are going down,
Hmm.
is because you don't have, when you had to feed a heroin habit
Hmm.
or a crack habit or a meth, you had to pay. It was expensive.
Right.
Well, if you can stand, like I said, if you can stand on the corner and collect money with a cardboard sign and get enough
Hmm.
to stay high all day, you don't have to burglarize houses. You don't have to rob stores.
Right.
Remember when OxyContin was going, we were having armed robberies of pharmacies left and right.
Hmm.
So all those things have dissipated. Burglaries have gone down, robberies have gone down. I'd venture to guess. And so, now, violent crime, like homicides and things like
Hmm.
that, depends. But I think they've gone down in
Hmm.
some places. And again, I think people aren't studying the facts. And the facts are you've got a drug that is permeating society
Hmm.
that makes people, they're not, they're not having, hey, I've got to get a fix of fentanyl. I'm going to go rob a store
Hmm.
because it's so cheap to get a fix of fentanyl.
Right.
It's a really interesting phenomenon. So when I hear people talking about, oh yeah, we're this crime suppression effort's working, this, that, the other. Well, no, what's working is they
Hmm.
don't have to commit crimes to feed a habit. Heroin could cost an addict back in the day $300 a day, 350, $400. Do you know how many burglaries you have to commit?
Yeah. A lot.
How many robberies you have to commit to stay on top of it? Read an Edward Bunker book, from back in the day about all the things people had to do. I mean, his books are a fictional work, but they're based on truth.
Hmm.
But all the things people had to do to stay ahead of a heroin habit, always hustling, always looking for an angle,
Right.
right? And it was the same thing with crack. It was the same thing, when people needed that fix, it was $20 a hit for crack. It
Hmm.
was it was $20 a hit for for heroin, $20 a hit, and it depends how long it lasts. And like heroin, it made you sick. So
Hmm.
I'm kind of amazed at what I see when I say that, and I think people need to stop and be realistic about what the impacts of fentanyl is having
Hmm.
on our society. I don't think they realize the dichotomy of effect.
Right. So I always have to wonder, like, the politicians cannot be totally oblivious to those facts. So how much of what goes on is because they're allowing it to happen because it works in their political favor? It's a tool for them to leverage the other things that they're trying to accomplish or to stay in power.
That's an interesting take. I'll say this: I working at DPS, I got to work far more closely with politicians than I ever had when I worked for Phoenix PD or
Hmm.
when I worked for Mesa PD because I'm working for the state. So you're
Right.
working with the state legislature. Um, there's some. I will say this. I know this is going to sound probably boggle some people's minds, but there's some really good politicians down there.
Hmm.
Um, and though their ideals, whether they are Democrats or Republicans, may not be uh, aligned with people of opposing parties, uh, some of them really are idealists. They really believe in what it is they were elected for.
Mhm.
And then there's some of them that are flatly abusive of the
Mhm.
positions that they're in, and do some really underhanded, immoral things. But I would tell you the vast majority of them
Mhm.
are really trying to do the right thing, but they're always having to strike deals because they can't get anything passed if they're not working with each other to strike a deal.
Right.
Um, I sometimes don't think people realize how bad a problem is until it's catastrophic. I had been talking about the issues with China and the impacts of precursor chemicals
Mhm.
for a decade, basically,
Mhm.
and it like nobody believes it.
Right.
And all of a sudden now we believe it, but even now, if you were to talk about frustration, political frustration,
Mhm.
it, if I'm not mistaken, it's as if China is fighting a proxy war with the United States with drugs, poisoning our society, right?
Right.
Because and Mexico's facilitating.
Right.
Because if Mexico said, "Hey, we're not letting in those chemicals anymore,"
Mhm.
and that's the one thing they can certainly control is large shipping ports, right? I'm not talking about little boats. I'm talking about huge ships that are bringing these precursor chemicals in.
Right.
That challenges the problem to an extent.
Mhm.
But we're not putting that much pressure on Mexico, and we're not putting that much pressure on China. So that perplexes me. But at the state level, there's I think they when they understand the problem, when they hear the problem, I do think there's a lot of politicians out there that try to do the right thing.
Mhm.
They have to play the game, because if you're going to get something passed or done and be successful, great. But I think some of the lobbyists do some pretty pretty underhanded stuff. But
Mhm.
I think some of the politicians are actually pretty good people.
Right. So, trying to think of how to phrase this. Um, a lot of the times are things like are basically being in a cold war with China. This has been going on for a long time. This is not a recent thing, right?
Mhm.
But it's only becoming more evident now because it's harder and harder to ignore it, right? The issues that we have with Mexico, all of the open border problems, the sheer number of illegal people coming into this country, and not just from Mexico, but from geopolitical enemies of ours that are coming to this country, right? When Biden repealed the things that Trump had put in place, you know, back in when he was elected, nobody was really paying that much attention to it. But now it's gotten to this catastrophic level where you can't ignore it anymore, right? So how much of those sorts of things, why does it take us so long to catch on to the things that are real threats to our country and to our people before people really start paying attention to it instead of just passing it off as, nah, this is just a conspiracy theory.
Well, I think you've got two different things going on here.
Hmm.
One, you've got the issue of until it touches me, it doesn't affect me,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
So that's a factor. People really walk around in society oblivious. Until it touches me, it doesn't affect me.
Right.
Right? I mean, for 20 years we were fighting a war overseas. We had young men and women thousands of miles from home in danger every day,
Hmm.
whether it be in direct engagements or IEDs or tax. It didn't matter what, or just being away from home
Hmm.
for 20 years. And we went to the mall and we enjoyed the air conditioning of our homes. And,
Right.
uh, we just popped over to Quick Trip and were able to get a cold drink and gas up. And
Hmm.
we had young men and women from this country fighting wars on in two different countries,
Hmm.
not to mention our special forces guys who are all over the world fighting while we're doing that.
Right.
Well, it doesn't touch us, so we don't know. It's not touching us, and the border issue is very much the same thing.
Hmm.
And the the border issue is a challenge, and I'll say this: I don't work for the man anymore, so I don't have to be complimentary, but I will. I worked for the greatest governor in the history of the state of Arizona, Doug Ducey. Um, he he went at these issues, uh, but he did it with a respect of and sensitivity for humanity.
Hmm.
I watched directly the effort and consternation both he and his staff, an exceptional staff, would go through to try and figure out a way to do things in the most humane manner.
Hmm.
People would think that he's this anti-immigration person. No, no, he knew what was happening to these people and how they were being victimized when they were coming in.
Hmm.
He, like everybody else, knew there was a better way to create the federal government to allow people to come into our country in a more expedited fashion. The thing that frustrated me personally was, and I'm only second generation here,
Hmm.
you know, my grandparents came off the boat, but they came through Ellis Island. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if 100 years ago or 80, 90 years ago, people could come through Ellis Island and we could set that up 80, 90 years ago, you're telling me we can't set up a new Ellis Island in the southwestern United States, something in that concept
Right.
with better technology to fingerprint people, DNA profile people, and create an expedited process to give them a taxpayer identification number,
Right.
right? Bring them in, let them work here legally, and work towards citizenship with that taxpayer identification number. No crime. If you haven't committed a crime, we've got your fingerprints, we've got your DNA.
Hmm.
You're paying taxes. Hey, after 5 years, you can take your test to be a citizen, so on and so forth, and expedite the process. I'm amazed that we can't do that, but we've got to shut down the border to be able to do that. We have to
Right.
lock the border,
Hmm.
but find an expedited process to help people come into the country at the same time.
Right.
We've got brilliant people in the world,
Yeah.
you know, that can do that. Brilliant people in this country that can develop a system to do that.
Hmm.
Um, I- you know, I'm further bothered by the fact that there's a great many people who are coming here to work, and that is it. They are not coming here to victimize the system, to take advantage of the system. They're terrified of the system. Many of them, they just want to work.
Hmm.
Uh, and people can lie to themselves about who's trimming the grass in their yard and who's cutting their trees and who's
Right.
constructing their buildings and who's picking their cabbage and who's doing this and who's doing that.
Right.
But you need to be realistic about it.
Hmm.
At the same time, there are people walking into this country that are damn dangerous claiming asylum.
Hmm.
And again, I mean, if you're seeing them in the news right now,
Right.
you're talking about people who are supporting Hamas, who are supporting Hezbollah
Hmm.
in the United States of America.
Right.
And that's why I say, I go, are we, have we forgotten what happened 20 years ago?
Hmm.
Is it that far removed? So, um, there's people who genuinely need asylum. There's
Right.
people who are genuinely coming here to work. There's a better system in place, but for the for the time being, until that system's in place, we
Hmm.
have got to lock the border down. And once the border's locked down,
Hmm.
now you can start to talk.
Right.
Now you can say, okay, let's develop that new age Island system in the southwestern United States to help people come to America, to become citizens in this country, to help them work and not get victimized by people
Hmm.
who are paying them pennies on the dollar for the hard work they're doing
Right.
to drive our country forward.
That is an extraordinary idea. I'd never even thought about that.
Yeah.
I just using the Ellis Island as a model for that idea.
Yeah,
That's
it's just in our tech, and again, and our technology's better. I think people had the wrong impression too of what was happening. Down, for instance, down in Yuma, this is not, this wasn't a situation where these people have walked from southern Sinaloa to the border.
hmm.
These were people from Europe who were flying in to Mexico City,
Hmm.
on a regular coach flight with their baggage,
Hmm.
then getting on another plane to Mexicali,
Right.
and then picking up an Uber. This is no joke, to
Yeah.
the border and walking across. Because I was amazed. I was down there one day. I'm thinking, man, these people look really like spry and well fed, but they weren't people from Mexico. They weren't people from
Right.
Guatemala. They were people from Europe
Hmm.
who were coming in from Georgia, from here, from there. I mean, our biggest immigration challenges down there
Hmm.
at the time anyway were Brazil, Cuba, Venezuela,
Hmm.
and then Europe. And but people think that it was a bunch of people from Mexico running across the border. That was,
Right.
at least in the Yuma sector, that was not what was happening.
Hmm.
People didn't understand that we were able in one sector down in Tucson to turn people away, Border Patrol was, but in the other sector we weren't. It was just kind of there were federal rules that were in place,
Hmm.
and so it was just kind of interesting as to who was coming in. I don't think people grasped in the United States who was coming into our country, and in
Right.
some cases how dangerous they were.
Hmm.
Yeah, this was not a guy coming across going, "Hey, I've got a cousin who's got a landscape company, or I've got a cousin who knows how to do software, and he's going to show me how to do that coming from Mexico."
Right.
That was not what was coming across.
Hmm.
We allowed some damn dangerous people to come in
Right.
to this country. I shouldn't say we allowed,
Hmm.
the federal government allowed.
Right.
And it isn't the Border Patrol, and it isn't ICE, and it isn't Customs. They did their job. They were busting their asses. I have the utmost respect for Border Patrol agents, uh, Customs. I can't tell you what great people they are and were to work with,
Hmm.
how hard they worked, how outman they were. That was failed federal policies that took place and
Hmm.
that took root. And I'm not an overly political guy, I'll tell you right now,
Hmm.
but I watched it happen. When the administration change happened,
Hmm.
whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, whether you like Biden or you don't like Biden, the facts were the facts. The border became porous. And
Right.
that was to nobody's advantage. And especially when you see what happens to the people who are trying to make that not the people who I'm talking about who are flying into Mexico City, then Mexicali, but the people who are making the trek
Hmm.
from southern Mexico or from Central America. The victimization by the cartels that takes place is
Right.
horrific. And it's not, this isn't something new.
Hmm.
You go back, I think there's an old book by Joseph Wombaugh called Lines and Shadows. And I think he talks about that. I mean, there's just, I heard one story that they caught one woman with a bag of pills, and I wasn't there for the story, but I heard it from a person at Border Patrol who I trust,
Hmm.
and they thought they bagged her with fentanyl. Well, it wasn't. They were like RU 486 pills for abortion because they knew they were going to be raped along the way.
Right.
I mean, when you think about how horrific that whole situation is, and
Hmm.
so, it shouldn't be like that. We should have a better system, lock the border down, and then create an expedited system for
Hmm.
people to find a path into the country.
Right. Definitely.
Yeah.
And then you also have the media, the mainstream media, who is complicit in all of this because they're singing the song constantly about, oh, these are just poor immigrants that are trying to make a better lives for themselves and completely downplaying all of the other aspects that go along with that. Just like you're saying, all of the things that are happening with the cartels along the way and the sheer number of people that are from, like I said, our geopolitical enemies that are coming here, not to work, to cause problems in this country.
Right. I mean, we're a nation of laws,
Hmm.
and what's happened really more so in the last 20 years than any time that I recall in our history is we're not abiding by our laws.
Hmm.
And if you're a nation of laws that doesn't abide by their laws, you're going to have problems.
Right.
I'm not, and again, I'm talking about what I experienced. I went to Texas when we were working with Texas DPS on some different things, and I saw what they were dealing with down in Eagle Pass and whatnot, and getting briefed by them.
Hmm.
And that's a whole nother challenge. And that's the problem is you had so many different types of illegal immigration taking place
Hmm.
and volumes that citizens in the United States couldn't get a grip on. Wait, what? Which one's which? Who's coming where? Well, they're all coming in different styles and droves.
Hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, and my belief is, you have to lock the border down and say, listen, these are our laws. You've got to follow. You've got to follow those laws. And fight off that sneeze.
You did.
But you've got to follow those laws. And if you follow those laws, this is the path forward to become a citizen. But what are you teaching people coming through, whether they are coming here just to work or they're coming here to commit crimes?
Hmm.
What are you teaching people if the very first thing you tell them is breaking the law is okay?
Right.
Some of them are good people and they just go, hey, I've got to get past this one thing and then I just want to be quiet and work. Many of them are,
Hmm.
but we've got to have a standard.
Right. So, and then there's kind of another layer to this where you have the federal government telling Texas that it's not okay for you to protect your own borders when it's the federal government's job to do that. So they're derelict in their duty, but they're suing Texas for doing what they're failing to do.
Yeah, you have to decide if you're the federal government,
Right.
you have to say, hey, we're going to do the job and protect the borders, or or you got to give the rights to the state to do it
Right.
and protect the border and give them the funding to do it. And maybe that's the answer. Um, Sadly, I think just there. I think people are pawns in a much larger game,
Hmm.
and what we don't drill down to is those are individual lives
Right.
um, on both sides of the equation
Hmm.
that are dealing with it.
Right.
There's farmers down there. There's people whose lives are being affected down there. There's people who are victims of crimes in this country by people who are coming in illegally from across the border. And it's a blip. It's a news story. It's a number, and we're not drilling down to the impact that has on people's lives or the impact it has on the victimization of the people who are trying to come across. Like I said, hey, I'm not a genius. It's a simple answer.
Hmm.
It's not that complicated.
Right.
Lock the border down.
Hmm.
That's it. Lock the border down.
Yeah.
And then develop a system to help people become citizens in this country in a more expedited and legal fashion so
Hmm.
they don't have to be victimized, so they don't have to wait 3 years to try to get in.
Right.
They get a taxpayer ID number, they get fingerprinted, they get their DNA taken, they get an ID, and off we go,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
I don't think a lot of people in this country would have an issue with that. Just do it the right way, take the right path, and move forward. But this stuff with just running across the border and doing what you want to do, you're already teaching people about
Hmm.
the fact that we're a nation of laws that we don't enforce.
Right. Yeah. So you touched on something earlier too, like there's all of the stuff going on with the college campuses and all of the protests that are going on there. You have what I will call useful idiots, the students that are being manipulated into these sorts of things by people who George Soros is funding and driving so much of this to push people to protest in the name of Palestine and Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. And I don't think most of them even realize A, the history of what they're talking about, and B, what it is they're actually saying. When they're calling for the death of Jews, that takes us right back to World War II. I mean, this is, if you looked at it historically, the period of time, the couple of years are leading up to the actual start of that war feels very much like where we are right now.
I, I don't know that I can disagree with what you said. I think again, having gone to college as a kid coming out of high school
Hmm.
and having attended a really great university, one of the ones that's been affected by some of this, and having gone back to college
Hmm.
as an adult and
Right.
then going to graduate school as an adult, I would sit in classes with students who were much younger than I was
Mhm.
because I went back to school after making the idiotic decision not to use my scholarship to do it while I was playing football and got hurt. Um, but I would listen to the thought process, and this is, I think I was in graduate school. I think I was in graduate school 20 years ago, which pains me to say that. It feels like
Right.
it wasn't that long ago,
Yeah.
but I was in graduate school probably 20 years ago, and I listened to the naivete of the students and some of the thought. Some of them were brilliant. Some of them boggled my mind. They were so smart. But some of them I would listen to, and I thought, wow, I mean, they're really out of touch with what reality is. Again, I'm not overly political guy.
Hmm.
Um, I just look at facts,
Right.
and um, it's not these 18, 19, 20 years. I think you have professional agitators that are helping this out, and I
Right.
think George Soros probably should be prosecuted, and his son. Uh, but not because I think if they want to facilitate free speech
Hmm.
and whatnot, I'm all for that.
Right.
But I'm just saying, you're when you start to talk about death to people,
Right.
any people, in a chant, death to a country, death to an ethnicity, death to a culture, it, that's treasonous, especially if it's the United States of America and you're living in this country and
Hmm.
working in this country. And to call for the eradication and death of Jews, well,
Hmm.
yeah, we've heard that before,
Right.
and it wasn't, and Germany wasn't the first time, and a lot of
Right.
people don't realize that. They don't understand why Jews and Israelis so bravely um, and emphatically defend Israel.
Hmm.
This hasn't gone on for 100 years. This has gone on for hundreds of years, and the
Right.
persecution and eradication
Hmm.
of what is both a religion and an ethnicity. And when you're 18, 19 years old, if you're one of those kids and you're not one of the professional agitators, if you're one of those kids that's in that group, 10 years from now, you may be looking back saying, what the heck was I doing?
Right.
What did I say? What did I get into?
Hmm.
Because unfortunately, sometimes in life we say things that we
Hmm.
don't get to go back on,
Right.
and we do things we don't get to go back on.
Hmm.
And all of us
Right.
have go backs, right? I mean, I love hearing people say, I have no regrets. I have nothing. I do nothing differently. God bless you. I do. I
Right.
do. There's a whole bunch I do differently. You
Right.
know what I mean? If I had a little time clock and I could wind a few things back, whole bunch I'd do differently.
Right.
But I'd make many better decisions. But the fact of the matter is, I think some of these are decisions they're making. They're not going to be able to unwind,
Hmm.
and it's really it's sad because it is turned into this hate fest,
Hmm.
and I don't know. It bothers me sometimes. I just cannot imagine that people cannot figure out how to get along and protest. I've managed protests,
Okay.
obviously. When I was director at DPS, I got to be there for the probably the most intense years the
Hmm.
agency faced
Right.
with that. And I think there were some wonderful protesters. And I know that sounds like an interesting thing to say coming from the head of a state police agency, but the truth be told, there were some wonderful protesters.
Right.
I completely respected the fact they were protesting. I believe in it. I think that you're sometimes not going to get change unless
Hmm.
you protest, unless you raise a loud voice, unless you demand that change. I just think you got to know where. where it stops, where it ends.
Right.
You know, um, people aren't going to ignore your voice if you want to be. You know, war is just ugly. You
Yeah.
know, violent death and shootings, and it's ugly and it's nasty. And the sad thing is that as it rocks people and it rocks their consciousness, that that you hope that people's consciousness is rocked,
Hmm.
but because that means they're human and that they're empathetic and that they're sympathetic,
Right.
but understand the totality of the picture as to the history of time and how things get places like this. So
Hmm.
it's a complex issue. I hate seeing it. I but it kind of not kind of it breaks my heart to see what's happening.
Hmm. Me too.
Yeah,
Like I said, I think that there are too many of the people that are involved who don't really fully understand what they're saying. And to your point, they're not paying attention to the consequences that can come further down the line. We are in the age of technology. Everything that is said is recorded somewhere,
yeah,
you know? And how many of these people are going to be applying for jobs or some other thing down the line and have this brought back to their, and say, "Well, you were calling for the death of an entire race.
yeah,
How is that going to affect them later on in life? You
yeah,
know?
yeah. Like I said, the whole thing saddens me.
Hmm.
Um, I don't, the fact that people, it's beyond me. It's the one thing I'll say I give my parents all the credit in the world for, um, is I respect who people are, whether it be ethnicity, orientation,
Hmm.
gender, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And I don't care what religion you are, as long as it doesn't call for the harm of anybody else.
Right.
I've spent 34 years, I assure you, in different assignments, defending people's very right
Hmm.
to be who they wanted to be.
Hmm.
And I would do it every day and all day.
Hmm.
Even if it may be something that's converse to my thought process,
Right.
but it's their right and they're not asking for the harm of anybody else,
Hmm.
I'm going to absolutely stand up and defend somebody's right to do that and have their right to be who they are. I just don't understand when it gets to a point that people call for the death of other people
Right.
based on those issues, whether it be orientation, whether it be ethnicity,
Hmm.
whether it be religion,
Hmm.
um, whether it be geopolitical. It just
Right.
it's astounding to me.
Yeah. Um, Not to get too far off the subject, but there's other issues that we have as far as like elections and how those things are run. There are people here in Arizona. Katie Hobbs is one of those people who got to see her oversee her own election, and I honestly don't believe she should be the governor. We have our attorney general who apparently has thousands of uncounted votes, so technically she shouldn't be in her position either. And yet these are two of the most influential people affecting so many different things in our state. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know, I don't. I was um, in my position at the time when Governor Hobbs was elected. I've actually talked to her when she was Secretary of State. Again, whether and remember, Governor Hobbs didn't retain me, uh, but I will tell you, in any conversation I ever had with Governor Hobbs, she was always when she was Secretary of State was when I really interacted with her
Hmm.
over some protection issues. So our conversations were very brief, but she was always really polite. She was actually a very, whether people realize it or not, she's a very nice person.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know anything about the Attorney General. I couldn't speak to her.
Hmm.
Um, and I like I said, it's just again, it's cyclic.
Hmm.
Um, like I said, I worked for the best governor that the state has ever had, and
Right.
and that's all I know.
Hmm.
Um, I don't I don't know what it is to work uh, for Governor Hobbs. I but I don't. And in fact, when I was not retained, I had no ill will about it. I understood that that was the process.
Right.
I completely understood that that was the process.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't, you know, I probably couldn't really speak to that kind of stuff. I can really only speak to the things that I know.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah. I read the statement that you made when you did retire.
Hmm.
It was very gracious and very there was no animosity there. So I thought that was awesome.
No,
You know.
yeah, there is none. I wish, and I mean this. I wish Governor Hobbs all the success in the world.
Hmm.
I do, because if she's successful, then the state's successful.
Hmm.
The state agencies are successful. My old agency is successful. If things are going well for her, then they're going well for the people.
Right.
And that's really, again, that when I tell you I'm not a real political person,
Hmm.
uh, my statements about working for Governor Ducey are not
Hmm.
statements about politics. My statements about Governor Ducey are the character of the man,
Right.
his staff. His staff was just absolutely exceptional. You know,
Hmm.
they brought on they took our attorney from DPS. In fact, Annie Foster, who's now a judge.
Hmm.
I mean, it could one of the most honorable human beings you'd ever meet. The chiefs of staff, the guys that were there,
Hmm.
Daniel Scarpinato, Daniel Ruiz, Gilbert Davidson. Um, these guys were just, you know, Kirk Adams, Ted Vogt. I mean, Sarah Prasad. I could name these people because they were some of the most exceptional people
Hmm.
you could ever work with.
Nice.
And it goes to, you see a guy, I will tell you that that's one thing I look at is Governor Ducey was a self-made man. He grew up in Ohio,
Right.
and he's a self-made man,
Hmm.
right? Self-made millionaire. And I think that's why the state ran so well, is
Hmm.
he knew how to pick the right people and put them in the right positions.
Right.
He didn't let a lot of the noise be a factor.
Hmm.
And I think that that's a factor. I think that's always a leadership challenge, you know. And so
Right.
like I said, I hope she does well, because I want my old agency to do well, and
Right.
I want I want the state employees to do well, and
Hmm.
I want the state to do well. But I mean this sincerely. I don't I don't watch much news. So if you told me right now something that was going on, that's why
Right.
some of that you're talking about I can't even speak to, because I don't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
You know?
I can tell you just from my own perspective that working in corrections, when I started, Doug Ducey was in office, right? And I can tell you that when Katie Hobbs took over, there was a significant decline in everything to do with our department. The way that the entire department is run, the staffing levels, the morale, more than anything, is extremely evident that there was a very strong decline, and I don't see it getting any better, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I would tell somebody in a situation like that is the most important thing you can do, if you're at the line level, if you're a first level supervisor, if you're a second level supervisor,
Hmm.
is no matter what, create an environment that provides positive inspiration
Hmm.
for those around you in that micro environment.
Hmm.
Um, you know, when I worked for Phoenix PD, I watched the ebb and flow of the agency, um, more so than any. And I worked at three major police agencies, but the ebb and flow at Phoenix PD was the most dramatic.
Hmm.
And while I might be in disagreement with people who were in positions of power or executives who are above me at the time.
Mhm.
What I wanted to do is create the absolute best environment for my unit,
Right.
for my squad, whatever the case may have been.
Mhm.
And that's what we have to, in organizations like that, that's truly what we have to concentrate on.
Mhm.
If we, if we at the line level, and trust me, I spent a lot of time at the line level, I spent a lot of time as a first line and second line supervisor.
Mhm.
If we allow ourselves to get immersed in politics
Mhm.
and the politics affecting the state and so on and so forth while we work for the state, it can really impact your psyche. And you got to kind of, not kind of, you've got to bifurcate those two things
Mhm.
and just say, okay, look, I don't agree with this politically,
Right.
but here's my mission and here's my job. And I really like the guys I work with, and they're good guys. And I don't want to let them down. And I want to be there for them. And I want to work together. And you start to go hand in hand, and I'd correlate it to this a little bit. Like, I was talking to some of the guys I work with. We were talking about leadership, some of the guys I work with right now.
Mhm.
And I said to them, I just rewatched Band of Brothers.
Right.
And I was glad I rewatched it because there was nuance that I took this time
Mhm.
from watching it that I hadn't before.
Mhm.
And the nuance was, how did they have the courage to get on those planes? And I'm not, and I'm missing all the other guys, the guys who were on boats and ships and who were down doing amphibious assaults and everything, and the pilots.
Mhm.
But I'm just talking about the 101st Airborne guys.
Right.
And I go, how did they have the courage to get on those planes? I mean, they could barely get inside the
Mhm.
door with all the equipment they had on. They had to push each other in and then fly in these horrible airplanes compared
Right.
to our standards today,
Yeah.
just tucked in and confined together. And all of a sudden, there are people trying to blow them out of the sky.
Mhm.
And the next thing you know, they got to jump out of the plane. They have no idea where they're going to land. How did they have the courage to do that? How did the Marines, in World War II, how did our young men and women do it? Have the courage to. I remember hearing a young man at the academy who had a bad day one day, talking about he was in a firefight in Iraq, and he said to me, he said, I knew when I popped my head up to return fire, I was going to get killed. I knew I was going to get shot. And I just finally accepted I was going to die.
Mhm.
And I popped my head up and started to return fire. And thank God he didn't die. Obviously, he became a recruit in the academy. But where do they find that courage? Where do they? And one of my guys said it to me. He goes, you know where they find it? They find it from each other.
Mhm.
I mean, it's intrinsic, of course. They've got intrinsic courage to
Mhm.
even get there,
Right.
but to even volunteer to do it.
Mhm.
But they get it from each other, and that's what I'm getting at is, man, there's been plenty of times in my life and in my career
Mhm.
that you can start to get caught up in the noise. You can start to get caught up in what's going on over here and this and that, and if you do, it can impact you too much. Whereas, hey, just concentrate on what's going on. And any of the times in my life that I got too caught up in the noise, it just never had good outcomes. So I just, especially when I was in leadership positions, of course, I would just bifurcate my guys from it. I might not be in agreement with what the some of the people at the agency were doing at the time,
Mhm.
but I was going to provide the best environment in the world for my guys to be successful for what we signed up to do.
Mhm.
And that always seemed to work out. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, with regard to what's going on campuses.
Mhm.
There's some people getting caught up in things, and I think you said it, they don't completely understand.
Mhm.
There's a lot of emotion getting ginned up.
Right.
And I think if you could maybe get some of the people out of that environment and say, hey, what, slow down real quick. Let's talk for a minute. Tell me what you're upset about. Well, it's this and that. Okay, well, hold on.
Hmm.
Let's have a real talk about it for a second.
Hmm.
I think you'd have a different outcome in that case. But when you have a crowd and a mass and
Right.
people are getting ginned up and they're hearing the same thing, you're going to get that.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's the challenge.
Right.
So I'm not an apologist for, certainly not an apologist for any politician or anything like that. But by the same measure, the key is know what your mission is at work and pay attention to that mission
Hmm.
and focus. And if you're in a position of leadership, create the environment
Hmm.
that you are focused on the mission and that your morale and inspiration within that work group or that work unit is good and ready to go forward.
Hmm.
And don't get caught up in the noise. And it's easy to do. It's really really easy to do. And especially if some things happen or times get bad or there's hiring freezes or short. Man, those things like because you hear it and you hear it and you hear it, and
Hmm.
it's like, hey, you know, there's this book I read and I read it regularly. And it's called As a Man Thinketh,
Hmm.
and I recommend it to anyone. And I think the book was taken from Psalms originally when he wrote it. But the thrust of it is this: what you allow into your mind is what you allow into your mind. The decisions you make are things that you allowed into your mind. Now, there's feelings and emotions that drive some of that, of course,
Hmm.
and you're going to feel how you feel. But what you allow your mind to do and the decisions you make with that information is entirely up to you. It is one of the few things
Right.
we control,
Hmm.
right? Sadly, I don't control if I walk out of here and in 2 weeks I get a diagnosis of cancer. I don't control that. I mean, short of not smoking,
Hmm.
you know what I mean?
Right.
People who I've known have died of colon cancer, pancreatic cancer. They didn't have any choice. There was no option.
Hmm.
What we do have an option in is how we react and how we respond to the information we allow into our minds.
Hmm.
And I think when it comes, if I could talk to more people in the workplace,
Hmm.
I would tell them that. I would tell them, hey, I feel it. I feel the passion. Even just listening to you, I feel that passion. But like figuratively, take a deep breath
Hmm.
and say, what am I allowing into my mind? And how am I allowing myself to respond to it? Because I control that.
Hmm.
And if I want to get caught up with that, I can get caught up with that. If I want to think that they're out to get me and this, that, the other, slow it down a little bit and
Hmm.
just go, hey, this is my box right here,
Right.
and it's the one box you control.
Hmm.
Richard Pryor was talking about Jim Brown,
Right.
and he was talking about the fact that when Jim Brown was playing football, guys would try and do some pretty low down stuff to him. So in one of his skits, he talks about a guy stuck his finger inside Jim Brown's face mask, and Jim Brown bit his finger off. Right
Yeah.
now, I don't know if this is true or not, but this is Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
Okay, and he said Jim Brown said everything on the outside of this mask belonged to him. Everything on the inside belonged to me.
Yeah.
And you know what I took from that? It goes back to as a man thinketh, right?
Right.
Everything on the outside can belong to them. Anything that goes in my head
Right.
and how I choose to respond to it
Hmm.
belongs to me.
Absolutely.
And so that's the one thing I'd say to you about that. And I hope the leaders at the management and mid-management level, because I know some of the guys who work over there who are in management who I have a ton of respect for. Um, and I've got buddies who work there, and I think you have to have that mindset. Hey, what am I here for? What's my mission?
Right.
Let's take care of each other,
Hmm.
and let's lead our way through it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So the one thing I will say is that even though I don't like the direction that the department is going as a whole, I will say that the supervisors that I have and the people that I work with on my unit, they do an excellent job of preserving the morale that we have, at least for each other. And just like you're saying, we're there to support each other. The supervisors do everything they can to make sure that it can be as good as it can with everything else that we have to deal with,
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, you're gonna have, look, and when you have a change in government,
Hmm.
a change in administration, this is the history of time.
Right.
You're gonna have a change with pretty much everything,
Hmm.
and it's cyclic, And I was talking to some troopers at a restaurant
Hmm.
that I saw, and they echoed the same sentiments, but I'm just, I try to convey to them, hey, just slow it down a little bit. Don't all of a sudden look to leave and go into, end your drop or just retire, right when you hit your 20, because it's, it's a challenging world out there,
Right.
and you know, things are going to be challenging and they're going to change. And I know who the previous director was there, and he was a personal friend, and I have beyond the utmost respect for him. He was, he worked in federal corrections, former Marine, uh, came up tough and just as smart a guy as I'd ever meet in my life, and
Hmm.
I just had a ton of respect for him. There's Dave Shin, but I had a ton of respect for Chuck Ryan.
Hmm.
And, but it's cyclic. People are going to try a new system, a new program, and okay, it works, it doesn't work, but point is, do where within that work unit, do the very best you can within the unit,
Right.
and do the best for each other, and taking care of each other and protecting each other and making sure everybody's safe and making sure everybody's going home.
Right.
And that those are the big keys.
Hmm.
You know?
There you go.
Yeah.
Um, so typically, like as we're kind of like winding up at the end of the episode, I'll ask people like, "What's your best dad advice?" Hmm.
My best dad advice.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a simple one. I just said this to my kids at ASU. Um, don't make important decisions when you're too happy. Don't make important decisions when you're too sad. And don't make important decisions when you're mad.
Right.
That would probably be it. And people always go, well, why wouldn't I make important decisions when I'm happy? People make some really bad decisions when they're happy because
Yeah.
happy can take a lot of different definitions.
Right.
You can be in a lot of different positions when you're happy. You
Hmm.
can make a lot of different promises that you later don't want to keep or
Yeah.
can't keep. So that's why it's,
Yeah.
know your, also know when you have time to make a decision
Hmm.
and know when you don't.
Yeah.
And that goes into the tactical world and into the real world.
Hmm.
And I once heard somebody say in a tactical environment in a situation, we have time, and we didn't, and we don't sometimes. You can only take the best information you have at the moment and you respond to it.
Right.
And what these men and women in law enforcement are doing throughout our nation right now,
Hmm.
and people are overly judging them and split second decisions they make, they can only make them instantaneously like that.
Right.
And what are the sacrifices? Well, we know what the sacrifices are today. We wake up and we find out that 3 law enforcement officers are killed
Hmm.
by a suspect back east. So a lot of times we don't have a lot of time to make a decision,
Hmm.
but also know when you do,
Right.
and that transcends life and that transcends tactics.
Hmm. That's excellent advice. So I definitely want to be respectful of your time. I am really happy
Yeah,
to finally get you in here.
you
I
bet.
know that we had been talking about this for a while, and aside from all that, it was just great to see you again. We haven't rolled in quite a while, so
No, no, yeah, I can't believe I was thinking about it the other day. I've been doing jujitsu now for like 11 years, and is that right? Yeah, about 11 years,
mhm,
which just means I'm getting older and older. And I started jujitsu when I was too old. I sure wish I would have started younger, but
right.
now I gotta. Now I'm learning to pace myself with it. So,
There you go.
yeah,
Awesome.
um,
Well, again, thank you,
you
and
bet,
great to have you,
man.
brother.
Thank you, guys. You bet.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, you can now support the Non-Victim Nation by donating via listener support directly on Spotify. Remember, the story of your life is being written right now, and you are the hero.